If you like damage, then you're probably gonna like this build. This one absolutely blasts. Is by and far the highest damage output for the Barbarian and the perfect build to be pushing the pit. All of the footage that you should be seeing in this here video will be of me doing pit 130s in time, very handedly in time. Could do a lot higher than this if you wanted to. Me personally would rather grind my face against concrete, so I'm gonna leave that to somebody else. But I mean, it does an insane amount of damage into the hundreds of billions, if not trillions. So it's safe to say that it's not really going to have much trouble with anything outside of the pit. I mean, Uber bosses, what are those? But one note I do want to make before I get into the build video and before you start putting investment into this is that it's not the most playable. It's a little clunky. I will get into this in detail in just a second, but for those of you that are looking for a build that's a little more versatile, certainly a lot more fun to play, and by no means weak in any measure, I would recommend the Whirlwind variant of this build. I'll leave a video link to that somewhere on the screen. So getting right into how does it play, I want to get this out the way first. Really important, because to get the most out of this, there are a few things that you'll need to monitor during combat to make sure you're getting all of your damage. Now, outside of the pit, really high tier pit, you don't need to worry about this because everything's just going to get one shot anyways. But when you are in there and you're really trying to push, definitely want to keep an eye on these things. So the first is a snapshot, and that is on Soul Harvest, which is one of the witch powers here. So what the snapshot does is it will capture how many enemies you first get the buff with and maintain that for the whole duration of the buff, so long as you don't let it drop off. So what you need to do, in short, is try and do a massive, like an absolutely humongous pull at the beginning of every pit. I'll try and have some footage of me doing it up here on the screen. I believe it goes up to about 64 stacks. So 64 enemies is your goal. And then once you get that snapshot, it will maintain as long as you keep this buff up, which is very, very easy to do, because as you can see here, it has a 10-second duration at rank 10, and it can go up to 20. So as long as you use a cooldown in range of an enemy within 20 seconds, you will keep this buff at that really high level state for the entire run. And this is really important because this will be an absolutely insane amount of main stat. I've seen people reporting upwards of 10k strength with their baseline being like 5k when getting a really good snapshot with that. So definitely make sure you're doing that. Now, the next thing you're going to need to track is your Hammer of the Ancients buff. And what I mean by that is we're using Violent Hammer of the Ancients for the extra 40% damage when we overpower with it. And we're getting our overpowers through Combat Bash. We're not using the Mantle of the Mountain's Fury. We'll go over why in just a second. It's kind of a new tech at the moment. But the reason we're doing this is just for that 40% damage buff. Now, tracking it is going to be next to impossible. There is a buff here that shows you when it's ready to go. And when I HoTa, boom, there it is. But when all of these are going off, and unless you have 100% crit, you're not really going to be able to guarantee that you'll have it on every fourth attack. What I do as a good practice and works very, very well here is just track this buff bar and bash while it's going down. And when it's depleted, just do a HoTa again. And most of the times you'll do 5 or 6 bashes in between each one. And that will usually, so long as your crit isn't terribly low, give you enough to get that overpower every single time. And then finally, the last thing, and this is more of a general, just good tip for the Barb. When you're using your cooldowns, start with Wrath of the Berserker and then use your shouts so it reduces the cooldown for you. You want to try and maintain the uptime on this as much as possible, and if you do it that way, then you should be able to cast it again before the buff runs off. And providing you have enemies near you, the cooldowns on your shouts should be lower thanks to Bold Chieftains. But that will segue us quite nicely into the gear, so let's have a little look at that. We'll talk about the main points here. So we have the Ugly Bastard still. This is an absolutely insane helmet this season, giving us an insane amount of extra damage, 100% increased fire damage, and all of our damage is fire damage. So while berserking, all of our damage is converted to fire, and also, you know, we have incendiary fissures, which converts our earthquake damage to fire as well. So, you know, if in doubt, it's been converted to fire twice. Now, here is where things are a little bit different. And this is a new tech you'll see across all of the earthquake builds, and that is using the Shroud of False Death. Reason for this is the implicit there, +1 to all passives, is insane. That gives you an absolutely just a mental amount of extra damage. But unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, it's still bugged, and it's given us 2 ranks to unconstrained. See, it says there I have item contribution 1 plus the 1 rank that I have in it. You get basically 2 ranks, so you now get double the value from unconstrained, which you shouldn't do, but you do. So, you know, exploit early, exploit often, I guess, as they say. But we also get all of these extra passive ranks in everything, which gives us an insane damage boost. Absolutely way better than using the mantle, which is unfortunate because it was a really cool tech. Then moving on to the gloves, we have Fist of Fate here. You can see I actually don't even have ancestral ones. The most important thing here is absolutely the legendary, or sorry, the unique effect. With any unique, when you're picking them up, the most important thing by far is going to be the unique effect at the bottom. So the fire damage on this one and the random damage on this one are by and far the most important. For the legendaries, you'll see that we have quite a lot in this build as opposed to previous seasons. I just want to quickly say all resist is going to be a very valuable stat for us. It's going to be quite hard to get this time around. So having it here on your pants as a GA and on both of your rings is almost going to be necessary to make sure that you're capped. You can have it on your boots, but Warcry will give you a significant amount of extra damage if you happen to get at least a GA and maybe a couple of Masterworks on the rest of your gear. As for the aspect here, I've got Might will give us a ton of damage reduction. For our boots, we're using Exploiters to give us a huge damage boost against unstoppable enemies. And when you're in those really long fights in the pit, that will be a lot of the time. As far as gems go, of course, we're using rubies for strength. Then moving on to our runes, we'll talk about these first. We are using Lith Tech. This will create earthquakes for every 0.0 seconds that we stand still. So just standing in front of enemies will create all of our earthquakes for us, do a ton of damage. Over here, we have Ignigar, which will give us a ton of crit chance. Crit is very important for this build. You want as much as possible. This will give you 25% for using a non-basic skill every couple of seconds, which is going to be HoTa and our shouts for us. So going to get basically 100% uptime on that without even having to think about it. As far as stats go, when it comes to what you roll on the weapon itself, you know, excluding tempers, it's going to be strength, max life, and vulnerable damage. The reason we go for vulnerable damage, it rolls the highest, and we have 100% uptime on vulnerable thanks to our witch powers. We'll talk about those after gear. When it comes to the tempers, it will be a bit of a mix and match situation. You'll need enough damage while berserking to cap out your Blood Rage Paragon node, which is going to be 450%. So that is your goal. You take damage while berserking until you hit that. And then damage to close, you'll need to get that to 500%. And this is in addition to all of the rest of your gear, but you will need to temper it. And you are going to, of course, need to get Earthquake's chance to cast twice. Now, you only need one good roll with a triple masterwork on one of the two-handers to max that out, or basically max that out. So that's what we're going for. They're going to be quite expensive to do, but it's going to open up a slot on your weapons or on your other weapons to have Heavy Hitter. And Heavy Hitter is an absolute beast of a damage multiplier. It's a new passive that they introduced, does an insane amount of extra damage, so we want as many stacks of that as possible. I mean, look at that, 300% extra earthquake damage. Thank you very much. And then after that, if you have hit your berserking and if you have hit your damage to close thresholds, then you can roll damage while Wrath of the Berserker is active. You get a huge numerical value for that. It is additive damage, but you get a ton off it. And you should have very close to 100%, if not 100% uptime on your Wrath of the Berserker. Now, as far as aspects go, for the two-handers, Incendiary Fishes, and then Earthquakes on these two, doesn't matter which one. And then for the one-handers, we have Executioners and we have Vehement Brawlers. Now, you shouldn't be using maces. I just didn't find swords, so, you know, it is what it is. But there you go. Then moving on to the rings. Rings both have strength, crit, and resist all elements. As far as the tempers go, again, those are the same deal as with before. We have Wrath of the Berserker cooldown reduction on both, but as far as what we fill with, it's whatever we need. If we need close damage, damage while berserking, we get those first, and then we fill with the damage with Wrath of the Berserker active if we don't. As far as the aspects go, we've got Inner Calm and we've got Bold Chieftains here. Finally, on the amulet, this will probably be the most expensive piece of gear for you, unfortunately. But we want greater affix on strength and then double passive. Counter-offensive, and heavy-handed are just fine. You can get Slaying Strike too. That will work just as well. Tempers, again, Wrath of the Berserker cooldown reduction, and then either close berserking or damage while Wrath of the Berserker is active, depending on what you need. And then for the aspect on this one, I have got Bull Kathos. Now moving over to the witch powers, we'll take a quick look at these. We have Paragon for collecting all of the enemies up. Does a ton of work, feels fantastic to use. Soul Harvest, as I said before, huge, absolutely huge damage boost for us because you can get an insane amount of strength from it. Then we have Aura of Siphoning. This gives us a really nice heal per second, as well as activating our Shaken Soul. So any enemy affected by any one of our auras or, damaged by us at all will become vulnerable. And this will apply damage to everything within this circle. So it works very well together that. Aura Specialization increases the size of our auras. As you can see, these are pretty sizable circles around me. And then we have Hex of Whispers as well. This is a nice little added touch because it'll give us a really nice steady supply of Fortify, so we don't have to worry too much about that for this build either. It is important to note that you do need 3 of these Growth and Decay auras for the, sorry, not auras, but witch powers for the build. There is, this is very specifically set up this way. There's not a lot of flexibility in it. The reason for that is because of the occult gems that we've chosen here. So we have in this one here, the occult gem, I can't remember the names of them, but this is the one is for each aura and hex increases the damage that enemies take from you by 2%. We get 4% from this because we have 1 aura, 1 hex, but that's multiplicative, so very, very valuable. We then also have this one, I believe, is Hungering Void, which pulls enemies in every 8 seconds. I really like pairing this up with Paragon. Just enemies come flying at you from all sides, and it really helps keep those mobs nice and dense, so the combat is always absolutely bussin'. And then we have up here, I believe this is Friend of the Bog. Gives you 8% core stat, max life, and always unhindered. Unhindered meaning you can walk through enemies and you won't be bodybot, but huge survivability and damage boost from this one as well. And this is the one that requires you to have 3 Growth and Decay witch powers equipped. So that's why that's important when we have it set up that way. Now, as far as technique and mercenaries go, no surprise, 2-handed axe expertise, 10% multi on vulnerable enemies. So that's obviously really, really handy. Also, for the mercenaries there, we are running Feriana. There's a very strong case for running Sabu instead. I just personally cannot do without the movement speed and attack speed buff that Feriana gives. I will die on this hill. And then for our support, we have Ra here with Crater. This is another enemy pull-in, so I really like this utility. Having enemies sort of sucked in and piled up on top of each other just makes playing the Barb infinitely more fun, in my opinion. And now finally, we're going to go through the skill tree and the Paragon board, talking about the key components here. So again, key components for this build are that we're using Combat Bash for the overpowers on Violent Hammer of the Ancients. Very important because that 40% damage buff is no joke. You will notice when you do those overpowers, your damage will go insane. We have Warpath then to again give us an further multiplier on our damage when we overpower. Belligerence, because we're using Bash, that means we're going to be getting that multi as well. We have our standard suite of shouts and defensive passives here as well. We're giga juicing the shouts. You can see we've also pretty much giga juiced pretty much every passive thanks to the Shroud of False Death. Slaying Strike, giga OP this season. Really liking the changes to that, got to say. Again, really stacking up heavy hitter. This is our primary source of damage, so we are going hard as it comes on that. Unconstrained because we get 2 ranks to it when we shouldn't. I mean, what can you do? Now, as far as the Paragon goes, this might not be exactly what you see in the planner because it's just my impromptu version that I made while just swapping between builds. Make sure I have at least the core things right, which are Ire. You're going to want this for the damage reduction and also the extra damage while berserking. Here's the Blood Rage Paragon node. Like I said, you need 450% damage while berserking to get that 45% damage buff maxed out, so that's huge. Challenger, really like this on the Blood Rage board. You can get an absolute insane amount of strength on it here. Also, it's a staple glyph. You're going to see it in every build. Weapon Master got a huge buff as well. This is a really powerful damage legendary node now, so you're going to be seeing that quite a lot. In this board, I've got Rumble as well, pretty much maxed out with as much strength as I can put on it. And this is huge. You know, obviously we get that massive earthquake damage multi as well. And then the global damage multi, when we have at least 5 of them up, we get 50% extra damage as well. That all we have to do is stand still to get that to happen. We have Force of Nature, of course. This is why we want that 500% damage to close. So we get another massive, massive multiplier to our earthquake damage. And then for the glyph on this board, we have Marshall. Gives us a ton of cooldown reduction on Wrath of the Berserker to make sure that uptime is as close to 100 as humanly possible. We get the double multi on Decimator because enemies are going to be both vulnerable and we're going to be overpowering, which is really nice. And then on this board, we have Territorial for the damage reduction and the damage while close. Again, that helps with the Force of Nature. When going through your board, if you're not quite as high Paragon as me, the most important thing to do is actually hit each board, you know, get through them, get the glyphs activated, get the legendary nodes. The things that you can leave until after are things like the maximum life nodes and the damage reduction nodes. You will need them to push high, but you can do those after the fact. That, you know, all of these blue and yellow ones that are not part of like the glyph radius, leave those until afterwards. But that's it. That is the build. As always, if you have any questions, you can refer to the build guide. I do write up quite a lot of detail on why and how the build works in those as well. If you want to ask any questions down in the description below, by all means, I do try my best to answer as many as humanly possible. And if you like the video, I don't know, maybe give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more Diablo guide content. I'll catch you on the next one. Love ya. Bye.